Kyiv applied for EU membership in the weeks following Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022 and was granted candidate status a few months later in one of the fastest decisions by the bloc. Now, the European Commission has recommended that the EU start accession talks with Ukraine this month to signal support to the war-torn country weeks before Budapest takes over the presidency of the bloc. Now, joining me right now is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of Kyiv Post. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning. Pleasure.
Now, just to start with the general question, how significant is this news for Ukraine?
I think it's very significant. I don't agree with your correspondent who's reporting a few hundred yards away from me here in Kyiv. Look, it is very significant because the Commission has finally said that both Ukraine and Moldova have fulfilled the preliminary conditions, the preconditions for being considered as members. And in the case of Ukraine, these were the very difficult issues of de-oligarchization, clipping the wings of the oligarchs that were controlling the economy and political influence in the country. And secondly, de-oligarchization, let me get it right, and corruption, of course, the fight against corruption. This has been a major hurdle in Ukraine to satisfy its Western and European partners that it's doing enough to fight corruption and to clip the wings of the oligarchs. Why is it so important right now? It comes at a crucial moment, 3 years into the war, when it seems that the vast majority of European nations, states, are ready to have Ukraine as a member of the EU. So it's not only in the East European, the Central European states that traditionally have supported Ukraine's membership, like Poland, for instance, but now we have Germany on board. And from the statements made by Macron a few days ago, France also. So the key players are now behind Ukraine. And though Hungary is still blocking Ukraine's potential accession, there is growing concern within Europe that Hungary should not be allowed a de facto veto power. And there is discussion, as you've noticed, to kind of get around this somehow and to prevent the Hungarians unilaterally, perhaps with the Slovaks also, to block Ukraine's further movement towards integration into the EU.
Now, before we talk about Hungary, because I have a question about that, I want to go back to the topic of the issues. Now, on Friday, the Commission told the member states ambassadors that Ukraine now met previously outstanding criteria, and that is, like you said, anti-corruption measures, also restrictions on political lobbying, rules on assets declarations for public officials, and protection of languages used by national minorities. Now, this is a lot to tackle, especially when you have a war in your country. How is the Ukrainian government able to tackle these issues? I mean, is it harder now that because of the war in the country?
Well, the struggle with the oligarchs started almost immediately when Zelensky took over. There were delays, of course, because the oligarchs were still quite powerful, but some of them have ended up in prison, like Kolomoisky, for example. He's awaiting trial on various charges. President Poroshenko, an oligarch himself, he's very much in the background. He doesn't have the clout that he used to, of course. Other oligarchs have had their businesses damaged by the incessant bombing of their enterprises, and so are weakened financially as a result of that. Under pressure from Ukraine's partners, in terms of the complementarity that has been demanded of Ukraine in return for financial and political assistance, weapons, the Ukrainian government under Zelensky has, during this last year, moved quite earnestly to make sure that even at the top levels, officials don't get away anymore with hiding their assets, with lying about their assets, etc. And I'm sure hard decisions have had to be made. But, as you say, this is war, and it is for Ukraine very much a battle for survival, to be or not to be. So hard decisions have to be made. in terms of minorities, this was never such a problem here. The Hungarians have made it a problem in Transcarpathia, even though the EU hasn't considered for quite a while that there is any serious threat to the Hungarian minority there. And many of the Hungarians in that area have also said, look, this is artificial. This is a political game that Orban is playing at, using this as a means of holding Ukraine back and essentially playing up to the Russians.
Well, that's actually next question.
Right now,
Budapest,
I think what is significant is that the European Commission has said, look, on all these three counts, Ukraine has made the necessary progress.
Now, Budapest argues, like you said, that Kiev needs to do more for the rights of ethnic Hungarians living in Ukraine. Can you tell us more about that? Can you expand on that? How many of them are there?
Well, I've just said that for quite some time, the Hungarian government, not all Hungarians, Orban's party have insisted that Ukrainians do more to, shall we say, not recognize the rights of, because the rights are recognized, but do more to, shall we say, encourage the cultural, educational life of Hungarians living in Transcarpathia. The Ukrainian government has said many times, look, we are doing that. Come and see you for yourselves. Come and visit. They've invited the EU to visit. They've invited various commissions. There have never been any serious charges from outside other than from Budapest that this is really a major sticking block, that indeed it is a problem. So it's more of an artificial problem that serves the needs of Orban's party.
Now, speaking about, because we're going through, European Union members are going through election days, here in Poland, we can't really talk about specific certain parties because of the election silence. So I would like to keep it broad. But from the point of view of Ukraine, how significant are these elections?
Very significant because, as I say, it's not just talk anymore. We're moving towards action. We will need an intergovernmental conference to be convened, and there's hope that this will be discussed already this month. It seems that, as I've said, the majority of states, and certainly the key players and Ukraine's closest allies in Eastern and Central Europe, are fully behind Ukraine. So it's a question of getting around this final hurdle and, if you want, putting Hungary in its place. The EU has been acting like the Security Council of the UN, where one country can block the decisions of everybody else. I think within Europe, within the EU, the majority of states realize that this is a non-starter. This is going to mean that decisions will continue to be blocked by a single leader or two leaders if Slovakia backs Hungary, for instance. But also let's remember that as we talk, voting is taking place in the elections to the European Parliament. There are fears that the far right may make significant advances, and that this too could introduce an element of breaking the decision-making process. So I think for Ukraine it's very significant, but it's significant for the EU too, because in Brussels they have to recognize that they have to get around the blockages that may be imposed by individual states.
So for Ukraine, these elections are also very, very important. Bohdan, Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of Kiev Post, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Pleasure.